So welcome back to reading of the BFG by Roald Dahl with Mr. Mike. We're going to venture into a couple of extra chapters today, and we are going to take a little journey into finding out a little bit more about the giants, what the BFG eats, and it's going to be a little bit interesting. So let's take a look at what's in store. Let's start with the Bloodbottler. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you in there, Runt?" "I was hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt?" "Look out!" cried the BFG. "It's the Bloodbottler!" Before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and as wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten snozzcumber was lying right next to her. She ducked down behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who was you jabbling to in here just now?" he boomed. "I was jabbling to myself," the BFG answered. "Piffle whiz," shouted the Bloodbottler. "Bugs wallop," he boomed. "You was talking to a human being, that's what I was thinking." "No, no," cried the BFG. "Yes, yes," boomed the Bloodbottler. "I was guessing you was snitched away as a human being and brought it back to your bunghole as a pet. So now I is winkling it out and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper." The poor BFG was very nervous. There's no one here," he stammered. Why don't you leave me alone?" The Bloodbottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. "Runty little scrum screwer," he shouted. "Piffling little swish figgler. Squimpy little bottlewort. Punty little pogs whizzler. I is now going to search the primroses." He grabbed the BFG by the arm. "And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being," he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back, but now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around and the chewed off end of the enormous snozzcumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The Bloodbottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish brown. There was black hair sprouting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy looking. The eyes were tiny, like black holes. The nose was small and flat, but the mouth was huge. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters lying one on top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran down over the chin. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The Bloodbottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pibbling bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You was only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you is dotty as a dog's waggler," cried the Bloodbottler. Soon the Bloodbottler would be coming back. Sophie told herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The snozzcumber, although it was thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the Bloodbottler picked it up. She examined the chewed off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of these seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the snozzcumber, just large enough for her to crouch inside, so long as she rolled herself up into a ball. So she crawled into it. It was a wet and slimy hiding place, but what did that matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The Bloodbottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the Bloodbottler grabbed the half-eaten snozzcumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. Sophie, where is you? He thought desperately. You cannot possibly be jumping off that high table. So where is you hiding, Sophie? So this is the filthy and rotsome glubbage you is eating, boomed the Bloodbottler, holding up the partly eaten snozzcumber. You must be cockles to be guzzling such rub squash. For a moment, the Bloodbottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. That is the scrumdiddly-dumptious snozzcumber, he said. I is guzzling it gleefully every night and day. Is you never tried a snozzcumber, Bloodbottler? Human beans is juicier, the Bloodbottler said. You is talking rummy top, the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if only he could get the Bloodbottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavour would send him bellowing out of the cave. I is happy to let you sample it, the BFG went on. But please, when you see how truly glumptious it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchit for my supper. The Bloodbottler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the snozzcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. You is not switch fiddling me, is you? Said the Bloodbottler. Never, cried the BFG passionately. Take a bite, and I am positive you will be shouting out, oh, how scrumdiddly-umptious this wonder veg is. The BFG could see the greedy Bloodbottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. Vegetables is very good for you, he went on. It is not healthsome always to be eating little meaty things. Just this once, the Bloodbottler said. I is going to taste this rotsome eats of yours. But I is warning you, if it is filthsome, I is smashing it over your sludgy little head. He picked up the snozzcumber. He began raising it on his long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet up in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, don't! But that would have been even more certain death for her. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly, there was a crunch as the Bloodbottler bit a huge chunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from her head. Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed that she would be killed quickly. Yeah, roared the Bloodbottler. Yeah, blah, blah. And then he spat. Puh! All of the great lumps of snozzcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, went shooting out across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she would almost certainly have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. You little swine bugler, roared the Bloodbottler. You little pig swiller. He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the snozzcumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetables splashed all over the cave. You is not loving it? The BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. Loving it? Yelled the Bloodbottler. That is the most disgustous taste that there ever is, clutching at my teeth. You must be buggles to be swallowing sludge like that. Every night you could be galloping off happy as a hamburger and gobbling up juicy human beans. Eating human beans is wrong and evil, the BFG said. It's guzzling and glumptious, shouted the Bloodbottler. And tonight I is galloping off to Chile to swabble a few human chili beans. If you is wishing to know why I is choosing Chile, I is not wishing to know anything, the BFG said, very dignified. I is choosing Chile, the Bloodbottler said, because I is fed up with the taste of Esquimos. It is important I has plenty of cold eats in this scuddling hot weather, and the next coldest thing to an Esquimo is a chili bean. Human beans from Chile is very, very chilly. Horrible, the BFG said. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Other giants is all saying they is wanting to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school chidlers, the Bloodbottler said. I is very fond indeed of English school chidlers. There's a very nice inky booky flavour. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them. You is disgusting, the BFG said. And you is an insult to the giants people. You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinky little squiddler. You is a pibbling little pitsqueak. You is a cream puff nut. With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out the cage. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. Sophie, he whispered. Sophie, where is you? Sophie! Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. I'm here, she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. Oh, I was so happy to be finding you all in one lump, he said. I was in his mouth, Sophie said. You was what? Cried the BFG. Sophie told him what had happened. And there I was telling to eat the filthsome snozzcumber, and you were inside it all the time. The BFG cried. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you, you poor little chiddler, cried the BFG. You was all covered in snozzcumber and giant spit. He set about cleaning her up as best he could. I was hating those other giants more than ever now, he said. You know what I should like? What? Sophie said. Excuse me for coughing. He didn't say that. You know what I should like? The giant said. What? Said Sophie. I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one. I'd be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let me see if I can think up a way of doing it. Frobscottle and Whizpoppers. By now, Sophie was beginning to feel not only extremely hungry, but very thirsty as well. Had she been at home, she would have had and finished her breakfast a long time ago. Are you sure there's nothing else to eat around here except those disgusting smelly snozzcumbers? She asked. Not even a fizzwinkle, answered the big friendly giant. In that case, may I please have a little water? He said. She said. Water? Cried the BFG, frowning mightily. What is water? We drink it, Sophie said. What do you drink? Frobscottle, announced the BFG. All giants is drinking Frobscottle. It's as nasty as your snozzcumbers by any chance? Sophie asked. Nasty? Cried the BFG. Never is it nasty. Frobscottle is sweet and jumbly. He got up from his chair and went to a second huge cupboard. He opened it and took out a glass bottle that must have been about 6 feet tall. The liquid inside it was pale green, and the bottle was half full. Here is Frobscottle, he cried, holding the bottle up proud and high, as though it contained some rare wine. Delumptious, fizzy Frobscottle, he shouted. He gave it a shake, and the green stuff began to fizz like mad. But look, it's fizzing the wrong way, Sophie cried. And indeed it was. The bubbles, instead of travelling upwards and bursting on the surface, were shooting downwards and bursting at the bottom. A pale green frothy fizz was forming at the bottom of the bottle. What on earth is you meaning there? The wrong way? Asked the BFG. In our fizzy drink, Sophie said, the bubbles always go up and burst at the top. Upwards? No, that's the wrong way, cried the BFG. You mustn't ever be having bubbles going upwards. That's the most flush-bunking rubbish I was ever hearing. Why do you say that? Sophie asked. You was asking me why? Cried the BFG, waving the enormous bottle around as though he were conducting an orchestra. You is actually meaning to tell me you cannot see why it is a scrotty mistake to have the bubbles flying up instead of down? You said it was flush-bunking. Now you say it's scrotty. Which is it? Sophie asked politely. Both, cried the BFG. It is a flush-bunking and a scrotty mistake to let the bubbles go upwards. If you can't see why, you must be as quacky as a duckhound. By Ringo, your head must be so full of frog squinkers and buzzwangles, I's fritted if I know how you might think at all. Why shouldn't the bubbles go upwards? Sophie asked. I will explain, said the BFG. But tell me first, what name is you calling your Frobscottle by? Well, there's lots. One is Coke, Sophie said. Another is Pepsi. There are lots of them. And the bubbles is all going up. They all go up, Sophie said. Catastrophe, the BFG. Upgoing bubbles is a catastrophic. Will you please tell me why? Sophie said. If you listen carefully, I'll try and explain, said the BFG, but your brain is so full of bug whiffles, I doubt you'll even understand it. Well, I'll do my best, Sophie said patiently. Very well then. When you was drinking this cokey drink of yours, said the BFG, is it going straight down into your tummy? Is that right or is that left? It's right, said Sophie. And the bubbles is going also into your tummy, right or left? Right again, Sophie said. And the bubbles is fizzing upwards? Of course, Sophie said. Which means, said the BFG, that they will all come out swish-whiffling up your throat and out of your mouth and make a foul and belchy burp. Well, that is often quite true, Sophie said. But what's wrong with a little burp every now and again? It's sort of fun. Burping is filthsome, the BFG said. Us giants is never doing it. But with your drink, Sophie said. What was it you call it? Frobscottle, the BFG said proudly. With Frobscottle, Sophie said, the bubbles in your tummy will be going downwards. Ooh, and that could have a far worse and far nastier result. Why nasty? Said the BFG frowning. Because, Sophie said, blushing a little, if they go down instead of up, they'll be coming out somewhere else with an even louder and ruder noise. A whizpopper, cried the BFG, beaming at her with a big smile. Us giants is making whizpoppers all the time. Whizpopping is a sign of happiness. It is music in our ears. You surely is not telling me that little whizpop is forbidden among human beings. It is considered rude, Sophie said. But you is whiz-popping, is you not, now and again, cried the BFG. Everyone is whiz-popping, if that's what you want to call it, Sophie said. Kings and queens are whiz-popping, presidents are whiz-popping, glamorous film stars are whiz-popping, little babies are whiz-popping. But where I come from, it is not polite to talk about it. Redunculous, said the BFG. If everyone is making whiz-poppers, then why not talk about it? We're now having a squiggle of this delicious Frobscottle, and you'll see the happy result. The BFG shook the bottle vigorously. The pale green stuff fizzed and bubbled. He removed the cork, and a tremendous gurgling swig down his mouth. It's glummy, he cried. I love it. For a few moments, the BFG stood quite still, and a look of absolute ecstasy began to spread over his long, wrinkly face. Then suddenly the heavens opened, and he let fly with a series of the loudest and rudest noises Sophie had ever heard in her life. They reverberated around the walls of the cave like thunder, and the glass jars rattled on their shelves. But most astonishingly of all, the force of all the explosions actually lifted the enormous giant right off his feet like a rocket. Whoopee! He cried, when he came down to earth again. Now that is whiz-popping for you, he said. Sophie burst out laughing. She just couldn't help it. Have some yourself, cried the BFG, tipping the neck of the enormous bottle towards her. Don't you have a cup? Sophie said. No cups, only a bottle. Sophie opened her mouth, and very gently the BFG tipped the bottle forward and poured some of the fabulous Frobscottle down her throat. And oh gosh, how delicious it was. It was sweet and refreshing. It tasted of vanilla and cream, with just the faintest trace of raspberries on the edge of the flavour. And the bubbles were wonderful. Sophie could actually feel them bouncing and bursting all around in her tummy. It was an amazing sensation. It felt as though hundreds of tiny people were dancing a jig inside her and tickling her with their toes. It was lovely. Oh, it's lovely, she cried. Just wait, said the BFG, flapping his ears. Sophie could feel the bubbles travelling lower and lower down her tummy, and then suddenly, inevitably, the explosion came. The trumpet sounded, and she too made the walls of the cavern ring with the sound of music and thunder. Bravo! Shouted the BFG, waving the bottle. You is very good for a beginner. Let's have some more. Journey to Dream Country. After the mad Frobscottle party was over, Sophie settled herself once again on top of the enormous table. You was feeling better now? Asked the big friendly giant. Much better, thank you, Sophie said. Whenever I was feeling a bit scrotty, the BFG said, a few gollops of Frobscottle is always making me hopscotchy again. I must say it's quite an experience, Sophie said. It's a rat whistler, said the BFG. It's gloriumptious. He turned away and strode across the cave and picked up his dream-catching net. I's galloping off now. I'm going to catch some more whoopsie-whiffling dreams for my collection. I's doing this every day without missing. Is you wishing to come with me? Ooh, not me. No, thank you very much, said Sophie. Not with those other giants lurking around. I's snuggling you very cosy into the pocket of my waistcoat, said the BFG. No one will be seeing you. Before Sophie could protest, she had picked up her coat off the table and popped her into his waistcoat pocket. There was plenty of room in there. If you're wishing for a little hole to peep out from, he asked her. There's one here already, said Sophie. She had found a small hole in the pocket, and when she put one eye close to it, she could see out very well indeed. She watched the BFG as he bent down and filled his suitcase with empty glass jars. He closed the lid, picked up the suitcase in one hand, and took up the pole with the net on the other, and marched towards the entrance of the cave. As soon as he was outside, the BFG set off across the great hot yellow wasteland where the blue rocks lay. The dead trees stood all over, and all the other giants were skulking about. Sophie, squatting in the pocket, was getting bumbled all over the place. She saw the enormous group of giants about 300 yards ahead. Hold your breaths, the BFG whispered down to her. Cross your fingers, here we go. We're going right past all these other giants. Is you seeing that whopping great one, the nearest one to us? I see him, Sophie whispered back, quivering. That is the horriblest of them all, and the biggest of them all. He's called the flesh lump eating giant. Oh, I don't want to hear about him, Sophie said. He is 54 feet high, the BFG said softly as he jogged along, and he is swallowing human beings like they're sugar lumps, 2 or 3 at a time. Oh, you're making me nervous, Sophie said. I is nervous myself, the BFG whispered. I always gets as jumpy as a jog hopper when the flesh lump eater giant is around. Keep away from him, Sophie pleaded. Not possible, the BFG answered. He is galloping easily 2 times as quickly as me. Should we turn back? Sophie said. Turning back is worse, the BFG said. If they is seeing me running away, they is all giving chase and throwing rocks. They would never eat you though, would they? Giants is never guzzling other giants, the BFG said. They is fighting and squarreling a lot with people, but they is never guzzling. Human beings is much more tasty to them. The giants had already spotted the BFG coming, and all the heads were turned, watching him as he jogged forwards. He was aiming to pass well to the right of the group. Through her little peephole, Sophie saw the flesh lump eating giant move over to intercept them. He didn't hurry. He just lopped over casually to a point where the BFG would have to go past him. The others lopped after him. Sophie counted 9 of them altogether, and she recognised the Bloodbottler in the middle of them. They were bored. They had nothing to do until nightfall. There was an air of menace about them, and they lopped slowly across the plain with long, lolloping strides, heading for the BFG. Here comes the runty one, boomed the flesh lump eater. Ha ha! There he is, the runty one. Where was you splash winking off to in such a hefty hurry? He shot out an enormous arm and grabbed the BFG by his hair. The BFG did not struggle. He simply stopped and stood quite still and said, Be so kind as to let go of my hair, flesh lump eater. The flesh lump eater released him and stepped back a pace. The other giants stood around, waiting for the fun to start. Now then, you little grub squiffler, boomed the flesh lump eater, we is all of us wanting to know where you is galloping off to every day in the daytime. Nobody ought to be galloping off to anywhere until it is getting dark. The human beings could easily be spotting you and start a giant hunt, and we is not wanting that to happen, is we not? We is not, shouted the other giants. Go back to your cave, runty one. I is not galloping off to any human being country, the BFG said. I is going to other places. I is thinking, said the flesh lump eater, that you is catching human beings and keeping them as pets. Right you is, cried the Bloodbottler. Just now I was hearing him chittering away to one of them in his cave. You was welcome to go and search my cave from frack to bunt, the BFG answered. You can go look into every crook and nanny. There is no human being, or even stringy beans, or runny beans, or jelly beans, or any other beans in there. Sophie crouched still as a mouse inside the BFG's pocket. She hardly dared to breathe. She was terrified that she might sneeze. The slightest sound or movement would give her away. Through the tiny peephole, she watched the giants clustering around the poor BFG. How revolting they all were. All of them had little squinty eyes and enormous mouths with thick sausage lips. When the flesh lump eater was speaking, she got a glimpse of his tongue. It was jet black like a slab of black steak. Every one of them was more than twice as tall as the BFG. Suddenly the flesh lump eater shot out two enormous hands, grabbed the BFG around the waist and tossed him high in the air and shouted, "Catch him, man hugger!" The man hugger caught him. The other giants spread out quickly in a large circle, each giant about 20 yards from his neighbour, preparing for the game they were going to play. Now, the man hugger threw the BFG high and far, shouting, "Catch him, bone cruncher!" The bone cruncher ran forward and caught the tumbling BFG and immediately swung him up in the air again. "Catch him, child chewer!" he shouted. And so it went on. The giants were playing ball with the BFG, vying each other to see who could throw him the highest. Sophie dug her nails into the sides of the pocket, trying to prevent herself from tumbling out when she was upside down. She felt as though she were in a barrel rolling over the Niagara Falls. And all the time, there was the fearful danger that one of the giants would fail to catch the BFG and he would go crashing to the ground. "Catch him, meat dripper! Catch him, gizzard gulper! Oh, catch him, maid masher! Catch him, bloodbottler! Catch him! Catch him! Catch him!" In the end, they all got bored with this game. They dumped the poor BFG on the ground. He was dazed and shattered. They gave him a few kicks and shouted, "Run, you little runt! Let us be seeing how fast you was galloping." Oh, the BFG ran. What else could he do? The giants picked up rocks and hurled them after him. He managed to dodge them. "Ruddy little runt," they shouted. "Troggy little twit, shrivelly little shrimp, mucky little midget, squaggy little squib, grubby little grub." At last the BFG got clear of them, and in another couple of minutes the pack of giants was out of sight over the horizon. Sophie popped her head up from the pocket. "I didn't like that," she said. "Whew," said the BFG. "Few and far between. They was a nasty crotching mood today, was they not? I was sorry you was having such a whirly-gig time." No worse than you," Sophie said. "Would they ever really hurt you?" "I isn't really trusting them," the BFG said. How do they actually catch human beings they eat?" Sophie said. "Well, they's usually just sticking an arm in through the bedroom window and snitching them from their beds," the BFG said. "Like you did to me." "Ah, but I isn't eating you," the BFG said. "How else do they catch them?" Sophie asked. "Sometimes," the BFG said, "there's swimming in from the sea like fishies, with only their heads showing above the water, and then out comes a big hairy hand and grabbles someone off the beach." "Children as well?" "Often chidlers," the BFG said. "Little chidlers who was building sandcastles all over the beach. That is who the swimling ones are after. The little chidlers is not so tough to eat as old grandmama, so the little child chewing giant says." As they talked, the BFG was galloping fast over the land. Sophie was standing right up on his waistcoat pocket now and holding onto the edge with both hands. Her head and shoulders were in the open and the wind was blowing in her hair. "How else do they catch people?" Sophie asked. "All of them is having their own special way of catching the human being," the BFG said. "The meat-dripping giant is preferring to pretend he is a big tree growing in the park. He stands in the park in the dusky evening and he is holding great big branches over his head. And there he is waiting until some happy families is coming to have a picnic under the spreading tree. The meat-dripping giant is watching them as he lay out on their little picnic. But in the end, it is the meat drip who's having the picnic." "It's too awful," Sophie cried. The gizzard-gulping giant is a city lover, the BFG went on. The gizzard gulper is lying high up between the roofs of houses in the big city. He is lying up there snugly as a sniggler and watching the human beings walk on the streets below. And when he sees one that he likes the look of, maybe it's got a good whoopsie good flavour, he grabs it. He is simply reaching down and snitching it off the street like a monkey taking a nut. He says it's nice to be able to pick and choose what you was having for your dinner. He says it is like choosing from a menu. Don't people see him doing it? Sophie asked. They never see him. Don't forget it's dusky dark at this time, and also the gizzard gulper has a very fast arm. His arm is going up and down so quicker it's quicker than Squinkers. But if all these people are disappearing every night, surely there's some sort of outcry, Sophie said. The world is a whooping big place, said the BFG. It was 100 different countries or more. The giant is clever. They is careful not to be skididdling off to the same country too often. They is always switch fiddling around. Even so, Sophie said. Do not forget, the BFG said, that human beings is disappearing everywhere all the time without the giants even guzzling them up. Human beings is killing each other much quicker than giants is doing it. But they don't eat each other, Sophie said. Giants isn't eating each other either, nor is giants killing each other. Giants is not very lovely, but they is not killing each other. Nor is a crocodile dilly killing other crocodile-dillies. Nor is pussycats killing pussycats. They kill mice, Sophie said. But they is not killing their own kind, the BFG said. Human beings is the only animals that is killing their own kind. Don't poisonous snakes kill each other? Sophie asked. She was searching desperately for another creature that behaved as badly as the humans. Even poison-nosed snakes is never killing each other, the BFG said. Nor is the most fearsome creatures like tigers and rhinoceroses. None of them is ever killing their own kind. Has you never thought about that? Sophie kept very silent. I is not understanding human beings at all, the BFG said. You is a human being, and you is saying it is grizzling and horrigus for giants to be eating human beings. Right or left? Right, Sophie said. But human beings is squishing each other all the time, the BFG said. They is shooting in guns and going up in aeroplanes to drop their bombs on each other's heads every week. Human beings is always killing other human beings. He was right. Of course he was right, and Sophie knew it. She was beginning to wonder whether humans were actually any better than giants. Even so, she said, defending her race, I think it's rotten that those foul giants should go off every night to eat humans. Humans have never done them any harm. That is what the little piggywig is saying every day, the BFG answers. He is saying, I has never done any harm to the human beings, so why should you be eating me? Oh dear, Sophie said. The human beings is making rules to suit themselves, the BFG went on. But the rules they is making do not suit the little piggywiggies. Am I right or left? Right, Sophie said. Giants is also making rules. Their rules is not suiting the human beings. Everybody is making his own rules to suit himself. But if you don't like it, those beastly giants and eating human beings every night, we can do something about it one day. What do you think? Sophie asked. The BFG answered quite firmly. One right is not making two lefts. If you is quite cosy down there in my pocket, we're going to keep going. I'm fine, Sophie said. Then suddenly, once again, the BFG went into that magical top gear of his and started running. He began hurtling forwards with phenomenal leaps. His speed was unbelievable. The landscape became blurred again, and Sophie had to duck down out the whistling gale to save her head from being blown off of her shoulders. She crouched in the pocket and listened to the wind screaming past. It came knifing in through the tiny peephole in the pocket and whooshed around her like a hurricane. By this time, the BFG didn't stay in top gear for very long. It seemed as though he had some other barrier to cross, a vast mountain perhaps, or an ocean, or a great desert. But having crossed it, he once again slowed down to his normal pace and his gallop, and Sophie was able to pop her head up and look out once more at the view. She noticed immediately that they were now in an altogether paler, more different country. The sun had disappeared above a film of vapour. The air was becoming cooler every minute. The land was flat and treeless, and there seemed to be no colour in it at all. Every minute the mist became thicker. The air became colder still, and everything became paler and paler until soon there was nothing but grey and white all around them. They were in a country of swirling mists and ghostly vapours. There was some sort of grass underfoot, but it was not green. It was ashy grey. There was no sign of a living creature, and no sound at all except for the soft thud of the BFG's footsteps as he hurtled on through the fog. Suddenly, he stopped. "We is here at last," he announced. He bent down and lifted Sophie from his pocket and put her on the ground. She was still in her nightie, and her feet were bare, and she shivered and stared around her at the swirling mists and ghostly vapours. "Where are we?" she asked. "We is in dream country," the BFG said. "This is where all dreams is beginning." That's where we'll finish for today, but we'll pick up tomorrow and find out all about dream catching. Look forward to meeting up with you then. Bye for now.